Compass Mining is your trusted partner in Bitcoin mining. Whether you're investing in one machine or thousands, our customizable solutions are tailored to meet your needs. We are your experts in Bitcoin mining, offering a platform where individuals and businesses can purchase hardware, host machines, and access a range of ancillary Bitcoin mining services. We also specialize in large-scale site development and data center operations. Discover more at compassmining.io and see how we can power your success today. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power mining analysis. Markets are closed today in observation of the Easter long weekend, but that's okay. Anthony has brought along all of his charts and tables dissecting March performance for the top Pubco Bitcoin miners. We're going to be reviewing, analyzing, comparing, and contrasting all of your favorite stocks in today's episode. Before we get into it though, take a second, smash the like button, guys. Big help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comment section below which of the miners you're feeling most bullish on right now and why, and if you're personally making any buys. With that being said, let's get into today's episode. Okay guys, so that's right. Friday morning here, Easter long weekend, the markets are closed. We wanted to jump on. We've been talking a lot of data and analytics this week, Anthony. We've got some additional charts. You just put out an article with Compass Mining here today talking about March results, but we've updated our percentage HODL as it relates to market cap and this new Morgan Stanley valuation method using watts or megawatts to value the infrastructure of these miners. So a lot of numbers, a lot of data to go through today. Anthony, Bitcoin itself sitting in the $84,500 range. If we look at the performance of the miners year to date, quite a dismal outlook in the Bitcoin mining sector. We talked about the fact that they've outpaced Bitcoin to the downside here, but quite astonishing when you look through these numbers.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked this week about, what that year-to-date performance has been like for the miners. I mean, yes, you can see, Marathon, 26% down. CleanSpark actually looking quite favourable at the moment, only 21% down. But if you look at the average from all those miners there, you've got an average of 49%. And actually over the last few weeks, it's been between 48 and 50. So it's sort of holding in that range. If you step back and look at 5-day and yesterday's close, actually there's a bit more green on there. So we have seen a little bit of an increase there. I mean, we were highlighting 2 days ago Soluna's great performance, and they were up, I think, over 5 days, heading towards 40% at one point, I think on Thursday. Now you can see the 5-day change is only down to 13%. That's because of the big drop yesterday. Every miner was green apart from Soluna, so maybe some people have got in there at 40 cents and took some profits. It did reach 80 cents yesterday. It was up 18% in the morning, finished 13% down. So that's volatility for you on both sides for one mining stock in one day. And that's why some people quite like this space, but it's not for the faint-hearted. As you can see, year to date, those who didn't sell at the end of December, I know a few of the subscribers did sell there and have sat out this last 3 months and are sitting on probably some decent profits. Those who have kept it, their majority have. I think me and you have kept most of our stocks, and we're looking at these sort of 40-50% reductions. So not for the faint-hearted. But we believe Bitcoin's going to, continue its upward trend, over the remainder of 2025 and into 2026. So there's hope for the miners to come.
There certainly is, and this trend we're seeing about domestic Bitcoin production, we're seeing obviously the Trump sons get involved with Hut 8 Corp, so there are some signs of life coming back to the Bitcoin mining sector, but as it stands right now, Anthony, some difficult times. We'll come on to a few of these valuation metrics in a second, as well as an update on the HODL as percentage of market cap, but before we do, the mining results for the month of March. You've now compiled all of the data from the various miners that we cover. Why don't we start off with the self-mining summary, Anthony? This is a good snapshot of the month. You can see a lot of information here. What stood out for you in the month of March?
Yeah, there was a couple of things that stood out for me. Hut 8 announced, an increase in their self-mining hash rate. Now, for those shareholders who've been with Hut 8 since 2021, the last 4 years, They've been sort of like, waiting for an update for some new miners to come through. And then we had the merger and they were waiting again for the merger. We had Asher on the podcast and he was saying he's prepared to buy miners, but at the right price. And it looks like they've started to do that now. And so they managed to increase their hash rate considerably. If you look at what their Bitcoin mined per day in March, it was 2.8 Bitcoin as opposed to 1.6 Bitcoin in February. That's a 72% increase. So, their hash rate went up from 4.7 to 8.5 exahash. That's a nice healthy jump. They do have a plan to go even higher than that. And now they've formed an American Bitcoin company. We should expect them to start aiming towards that probably 25 exahash in short term, with the support of the president's two sons who are part of that company as well. So that being stood out for me there. We also saw IREN continue to increase its hash rate, getting closer to that 50 exahash, which it's got to achieve in the next sort of 6 weeks. Well, this was at the end of March 37. They've already announced in the first part of April they're at 40 now. And, with 10 exahash to go, no one's really going to bet against them not achieving that target by the end of March. Bitfarms also had a nice increase in their average operational hash rate. Their day-to-day change was 18%, so that stood out for me as well. In terms, of overall, it was a better month in March. A lot of the miners were able to increase their day-on-day production, which meant that there's less curtailment. When we've talked about some of these colder months, when the heating goes on and domestic requirement gets higher, the Bitcoin miners are social responsible companies. They start switching off, they start curtailing. Plus, at the same time, when demand is high, you can probably bet that energy prices increase as well. Well, energy prices to mining companies are like kryptonite. They want to make sure they're paying the cheapest energy. So when it does go above, a level where margins to squeeze, they'll just switch off their machines, and they can switch them off literally in seconds and then turn them back on again when the energy price comes down, maybe during the day when less and less power is used. So March was a good month, and we'll expect April to continue that process as well. But overall perspective, March was a fairly good month, and some of the other charts will explain as to why.
Yeah, you're certainly right about that, Anthony. The last month in Q1. Now, speaking of Q1, we're starting to already get some earnings release or press release earnings dates out from the miners. We've just booked Riot in for the 5th of May. Speaking of Riot, next chart here, Bitcoin mined in the month of March. You can see production levels are up versus February, as you alluded to. Marathon on top with 829. But speaking of Riot, a dead tie between IREN and Riot, both of which are really pushing into that top tier or echelon of miners.
Yeah, this is the first month since I've been covering mining stocks where two miners have not only produced the same amount of Bitcoin, but at the same operational hash rate. So literally neck and neck. You couldn't separate them out this month. They both had the same amount of machines hashing during that monthly period. That's closer, like putting your money down on a lottery ticket. But both came in with 533. Of course, Marathon with 829. They are the largest miner, over 54 exahash. CleanSpark, catching them as well. They're way over 40 exahash now, 42 exahash at the last count. Then and Riot and IREN are sort of equally, both of them well over 30 exahash. We've already explained IREN's at 40 exahash already. Riot's target is a little bit less than that, and they're now focusing on using that remaining 600 megawatts at their Corsicana site to deliver HPC, and they've already sort of had first part of the study to say that everything fits out there, and we'll be hearing more and more information as that progresses. Bitfarms, we already talked about them. They had a good month as well, 280 Bitcoin, that's 16 exahash of operational hash rate. And also, getting closer to what they said they would achieve, towards the end of last year. So they're well on track now. And having completed the recent purchase of Stronghold Mining, that gives them more and more sites that they can actually, determine how they want to play that strategy. I know some of the sites are very, very good or applicable to the HPC business there. There's already, Panther Creek's already having a report done on that site there. But from what we've heard from other sources, that they've got some really, really good sites in a good location and really good potential there. And every miner had a slightly better month in March, and so let's move on to the next chart.
Most definitely. Production by exahash. Now, this one's interesting, Anthony. We've seen over the months that we've worked together a grouping really at the top here. You can see a number of miners tied at that 17.6 Bitcoin per exahash. Can you talk to us a little bit about this phenomenon? Why are we now seeing so many miners tied at the top in this chart?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, if everything is done properly, every miner should be exactly the same. Because if you've got your machines on, the majority of the time, then you're delivering hash rate and you'll get rewarded on that hash rate. There might be slight differences in very slight differences, maybe pool by pool, where, rewards are very, very slightly different, maybe a fraction of a percent or something like that. But what this shows you really is now you've got the top 6 miners there, all above 17. IREN and Riot, you have to go down to decimal places. They were actually level again because they had the same output and the same amount of hash rate. DMG were like a 0.01 difference, and Hive were 0.02 difference. It was so close. In terms of that, CleanSpark, I think, were 0.04 difference. Those top 5 was literally a thread between all 5 of them. So that's what they expect there. Bitfarms, were slightly a little bit off the pace. Considering that the last 4 years they finished in the top 2 positions, and certainly they were the top miner in 2023, 2024. Hive were the top miner the 2 years before that, and they were second in 23, 24, and Hive are now in 4th place. But when we come on to the year to date, you'll probably see a fairly similar picture as well. These miners have been putting out good reports month on month in the first part of 2025.
Yeah, they certainly have. Now, the next two talk about production and HODL. So percentage of production sold. This one's interesting, Anthony. We see Hive came out 488%. Obviously, they're investing money into their new Iguazu site in Paraguay. We've got a great picture of that one as well. Another interesting point on this, we talked earlier in the week about CleanSpark's HODL strategy. They're now going to be shifting to selling a larger portion of their Bitcoin mined each month on top of those director remunerations that we've talked about earlier in the podcast. So expecting to see an increase in percentage for CleanSpark next month, but another interesting graphic here.
Yeah, you're quite right. Hive have used some of that to finish off their paying for their sites in Paraguay, and they're progressing those really well. We should see a really good April update from Hive because they were able to energize, I think one of their other sites in Paraguay, which is getting close to completion, at the beginning of April. So expect an increase in hash rate for them by the end of April as they start plugging in and delivering Bitcoin. In terms of Core Scientific, this is the one where they don't announce on their monthly update how many Bitcoin they have. So we've had to use a third party who've used HODL 15, who seems to have access to a lot of the wallets, and so their figure comes from HODL 15. So we'll get clarification from Core Scientific. Hopefully we'll get them on the podcast soon, and Adam or Russell can sort of explain what their strategy is around about the HODL. Now they've got no caveats to say they need to sell. Remember, when they came out of Chapter 11, they were told they had to sell any Bitcoin mined within the first 10 days, and they were sticking to that, obviously. But once they removed some of those debt caveats, as the share price rose and they were able to recover funding to pay off the debt, them caveats have gone away. So they've now put them in a position where they can start hodling. And the same with Bitdeer. Bitdeer do announce on their monthly update what they hodl, and it looks like they're literally hodling everything every month now. So Marathon and Riot have been growing their hash rate, but I suspect now what we'll start seeing, because there's not as many levers available, like Core Scientific, a lot of the other miners, who've been sort of staunch hodlers for a while, may start selling or may be forced to selling some of their production to cover at least the operational costs, and then determine how they're going to grow. We know some of the bigger miners are looking to go into HPC. The cost of capital for HPC significantly less than Bitcoin mining. So, when CleanSpark are looking at, they're a pure play Bitcoin miner, they're looking at HPC. When they're looking to grow their hash rate and go to the market to borrow against that, the premium on debt is a lot higher than HPC. So they've determined, obviously, we can use some of that 12,000 Bitcoin that they currently have as at their recent update and start selling some of that to cover some of the operational, some of the capital costs there.
Yeah, you just made reference to CleanSpark surpassing 12,000 Bitcoin. You'll see on this slide still slightly lower as this is an end of month March update. The big one that stands out for me, Anthony, obviously Marathon. Now, people talk about are we still bullish on the miners? Why are we so adamant about this sector? If you look at the HODL 15 chart of all the companies in the world that hold Bitcoin, 4 out of 5 of them are covered on the channel here, Anthony. We also give mention to strategy quite frequently, but when you look down the list, Marathon, Riot, CleanSpark, Hut, I think it's going to be tremendously difficult moving forward to surpass anywhere close to 10,000 Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the challenges. We've already produced over 20 million Bitcoin out there. There's only 1 million left, and that 1 million is going to take the next 115 years to produce. So 450 a day, you're right, it's going to take, unless some of these companies decide to go out and buy more Bitcoin, I think if you've got 10,000, you've got a really good stack. And, if any of the plans to create the strategic Bitcoin reserve come off, those companies with the high hodls are going to significantly benefit from that. But however, everything's an unknown. I mean, we talk about Bitcoin, we talk about strategic Bitcoin reserve. We don't know for sure what's going to happen. We know it's in sort of like high on the price list for the president, and we're happy that he's bullish that way because we're bullish on Bitcoin and we want Bitcoin to succeed. And by him, advocating for that, that's been helping it. But also, there are other factors, like the tariff conversation that haven't been helping it. So yeah, as I say, look, if the Bitcoin price rallies, where we think it might go to, where some of these top analysts think it might go to, then those companies with in excess of 10,000 are sitting really well at the moment.
Yeah, they certainly are. Now, we talked about valuation by Watt earlier in the week based on a Morgan Stanley excerpt. A lot of people in the comment section, Anthony, said, hey, this is a great valuation, but it doesn't take into consideration value of HODL or cash, debt, things like that. So speaking of HODL as a percentage of market cap, this is another really interesting way to look at these companies and further supports that valuation thesis we talked about earlier in the week.
Yeah, we raised this, on a previous podcast. Some of these companies now, I mean, DMG in particularly, if you look at the HODL at the moment, and this is taken at, current Bitcoin price, their HODL's worth, close to 39 million, and their market capitalization at close yesterday was 35 million. So they've got 110% HODL to market capitalization. And then you look at the likes of, I mean, DMG, we know they're a smaller miner. They've got about coming up to 2 exahash in hash rate there. They do everything really well on a smaller scale. Sheldon's, been in this space longer than every other CEO in the mining space. So he's pretty much the OG. He's built sites. He's hosted miners. He's been a self miner for a long time. So he knows his space in and out. He's growing at his pace. And he's doing that effectively. And they've got 458 Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and that's a healthy number to help them get to where they need to get to. I'm looking forward to their April update because hopefully that gets into the magic 2 exahash. But when you look at Marathon, we just spoke about Marathon being the largest miner, market capitalization of 4.3 billion. It was as high as 8 billion towards the latter part of 2024. So that's come down by 50% from the end of last year. But their HODL value today is worth just over 4 billion. So again, 91% of their whole valuation is based on the Bitcoin in their treasury. Yes, they have some convertible notes, about 2 billion convertible notes, but they have 54 exahash of quite a few sites that they now own. And 54 exahash of machines. You're looking at hundreds of thousands of mining machines, which will have a value. So again, not all that's factored in there. And then you look at, the likes of Hive, or mentioned Hive, because we've covered Hive before in terms of, valuation. They've got they own all their own sites. They're in 3 or 4 different continents now. Now they've moved into South America. 231 million market capitalization. They've got just over 2,200 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. That's 186 million as at this morning. So again, 80% of their total market capitalization is with regards to their Bitcoin HODL, and they don't have a significant amount of debt. So you really are, I think Hive have got a higher net asset value. And most of these mining companies at the moment will do something maybe next week and show you the net asset value to market cap as well, which shows for every dollar you're investing in the company, you're getting more than $1 in terms of value, because they've got more. If all the assets were sold off, that would achieve more than the market capitalization. So, really, really interesting. Obviously, the bottom three there are the ones that don't have a HODL. So IREN, they sell their Bitcoin on a daily basis, as do Wulf, as do Soluna. So IREN, you can say, they've got 40 exahash at the moment. That's got a value of $1.2 billion from a market perspective. And they've also got, effectively a reasonable size HPC business as well in association with that. So it is worth, wondering how the market does give these companies, a sort of valuation.
Compass Mining makes Bitcoin mining accessible to everyone. Start mining in as little as 48 hours with our turnkey hardware, online and mining directly to your Bitcoin wallet within 2 business days. Find out more at compassmining.io and get started now.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, if we take that valuation discussion a step further, this chart, Anthony, is based on a Morgan Stanley estimate or article, basically saying they've seen recent transactions for data center infrastructure fetching in the neighborhood of about $5 per watt. Now, we did the conversion. 1 megawatt is 1,000,000 watts. So in theory, 1 megawatt would be worth $5 million. If you look down this list now, just based on the megawatts, the power infrastructure, again, using Marathon as an example, it's saying they should be worth about $5.1 billion based on this $5 per watt benchmark. If you then layer that in with the $4 billion worth of HODL, you're getting in the neighborhood of $9 billion between the two main components of this company. So this is exactly what those subscribers were talking about, Anthony. If you take the Morgan Stanley valuation, you essentially layer on top that HODL calculation, the numbers start to look quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. This just really looks at value in each megawatt of power that they have currently. This doesn't take into account what their future power looks like, because for some of these miners, if you look at the likes of Bitdeer, IREN, TeraWulf, are going to have significantly more power as they grow now into sort of like their HPC phase. And so that would, but this is power at the moment. So even at that level there, the valuations look quite interesting for some of those. And again, do the same with Riot. Riot's at 6.3 million with the power they've got at the moment. Add on to that their HODL, and that takes you above 8 billion as well. So that means there's an even bigger delta there. Bit Digital, I think if you add on their HODL, that certainly puts them in a positive position there. Remember, Bit Digital do actually lease out, host their mining machines with other providers, and one of those providers is Soluna Holdings. So Bit Digital are growing their megawatts, but their megawatts now are being literally bought to provide HPC. So when we get Sam on the podcast, soon we'll go through that in a little more detail. In fact, we'll probably hopefully get their earnings out, and there'll be an update in there to say exactly how much power they've got at the moment. They haven't been producing as updates on a monthly basis like the majority of miners. So it is 49 megawatts is from a previous presentation. But I expect with all the recent updates, that number's probably growing as we speak.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see those reports as they start to come out, with many of the miners now pausing those monthly updates, Anthony. So we've talked about HODL, we've talked about some valuation frameworks or metrics there. Jumping back into the monthly production reports, utilization in March, you can see Hive DMG on top once again. despite the size of these miners, Anthony, as you alluded to, very well-run operations and know what they're doing in this space.
Yeah, this one sort of really separates out the ones that are. When we look at Bitcoin production by exahash, we're letting the miners use operational hash rate. So if they are curtailing, they're not using hash rate. So we let them use their operating hash rate for the month. And that's why there are so many miners on there. If you're only putting in your operational hash rate, everyone should be the same, to be honest with you. There shouldn't be any differences. Some miners don't, and that's why there are some big gaps at the bottom. So we know Core Scientific don't tend to put in their operational hash rate. If they did, they'd certainly be higher up the table than that. And Soluna don't put in operational hash rate either. But when you look at Hive, so what Utilization does, it takes their full hash rate, so their energized hash rate, and it says with your energized hash rate, how many Bitcoins should you produce? And then use what they did produce as a percentage of what they should have produced. So when we look at Hive, they produced 92% Bitcoin of what they were expected to produce with all their machines plugged in and working throughout the month. So actually, that's pretty good. Anyone's getting close to 90% is good. And as you can see, the vast majority of the miners on there are very close to 80 and above 80%. So that tells you that, they are curtailing at certain points or having maintenance or repairs. And we know, having gone to Denton last year, that repairs and maintenance, are carried out, on a large scale at most of these mining sites. That 150 megawatt site at Denton in the first 6 months of 2024, they'd had 11,000 repairs carried out on mining machines. So when you're repairing mining machines, they're not hashing. Now, the repair could take, 5 minutes, it could take 5 hours, it could take 5 days. But, there are repairs that need carrying out. Some are far quicker than others. Some may need far more attention, maybe have to be outsourced out. So this here, utilization, tells you from your whole fleet, what are you actually getting out of it? And it's a really good metric, and it's a really good metric for comparison as well. So again, Hive sort of flying the flag for that with DMG and CleanSpark in second and third.
They certainly are, and Hive and DMG take top 2 spots in the next table as well, Anthony. Revenue by energized hash rate.
So this is pretty much very similar to the last one, except we also allow, when a miner switches off and is able to receive revenues from that curtailment, we allow them to include that as part of their mining costs. So in terms of the likes of CIFR and Riot, and IREN used to also include, where they curtailed, they were able to get an equivalency to Bitcoin in terms of that curtailment back from ERCOT. Well, Hive, maintain the lead on this one here. They have such a good utilization that it would take, a lot for some of the other miners to actually catch them. But if you look at Riot and CIFR, they certainly were better in this statistic than they were in the previous graph there. And so this just looks at, revenues, but, by each energized hash rate. It's a great comparator.
It certainly is. The next one is one of my favorites, fleet efficiency. Now, this is a metric we've seen come down drastically across the board. I remember last year, 35 was common with a lot of these miners. We're now seeing every single miner below that 30 milestone, and a good portion of them actually sub 20.
Yeah, I mean, we know IREN have been there for the last 3 or 4 months, ever since they got to their target for the end of last year. They've been, a really good efficiency. And what do we mean by efficiency? It means that, if you've got more efficient miners, you're using less power to mine a Bitcoin. So yes, the mining machines of the most efficient miners of the market might be the most expensive, but your biggest cost in your cycle is the energy cost. So IREN have been able to mine Bitcoin significantly cheaper than the rest of the miners on that table, not only because they've got the best efficiency, but also because they've pretty much got the best energy cost as well. And they're able to achieve around about the moment a 72% margin, even based on the current hash price. What we've seen, it's sub $40 or just above $40 at the moment. So they're able to achieve, great margins on there. The standout one on this table actually is Hut. So during the month, Hut added a significant amount of the most up-to-date mining machines on the market, the S21 Pros, and that's brought their fleet efficiency down from over 30 down to 20.1 in just 1 month. So as they grow, that current hash rate, which was about 9.5 in terms of total hash rate, as they grow that to closer to 20-25 exahash, that will certainly be challenging the likes of IREN and CleanSpark, because they're putting in miners there that are sub 15 joules a terahash, and they only had a small amount of self-mining hash rate to start with. So when you start applying all new machines in there, you're going to rise through that table very, very quickly. Bitdeer also managed to, I know it says 29 there, but they also improved their fleet efficiency during the month, and that number will start rapidly coming down as more and more of their seal miner A1, A2s get deployed at some of their sites. And remember, with the current tariff issues going on, Bitdeer have also got a backup plan. They can start, rather than selling their machines to customers in the US where tariffs would be applied, they can actually send their miners to some of their other operations in Europe, in Africa, in Bhutan. They have significant sites there that could take miners, and once those miners get installed and energized, that efficiency comes down as well there. But yeah, expect some of these miners. Core Scientific also are going to improve their fleet efficiency, not necessarily grow it, but actually replace some of their older miners when they get the block chips through, which are due to be installed around about Q3 2025. So expect, these miners have come down significantly from what this table looked like maybe 12 months ago, but it's going to come down even further as these miners have to sort of rely on efficiency and cheap power to make a margin.
Yeah, they certainly do. We talked about that Bitdeer vertical integration, the flexibility that allows. In terms of valuations, Anthony, you mentioned the fact that these miners have hundreds of thousands of mining rigs or ASICs in the United States. We learned earlier this week that ASICs are not exempt from the current China tariffs, which further puts the value of these machines in the United States at a higher premium. Also interesting commentary about HODL there. We've seen from ABTC, or American Bitcoin, they are pushing to become the largest, most efficient Bitcoin miner in the United States, and sure making strides in their first month there. Now, the next one, Bitcoin mined per megawatt. This is another interesting comparative metric. We look at things by exahash, now starting to look at things by megawatt in a lot more detail as we open up the HPC AI discussion. But this one specifically looking at number of Bitcoin mined per megawatt in March.
Yeah, and again, it's basically, if you've got megawatts, capacity of megawatts, are you utilizing all the megawatts that you've got? And you can clearly see here, some of the miners aren't fully utilizing all the power they've got associated with their self-mining. So it doesn't include power that they've got for HPC. So if a miner's been able to let or in their records have said this amount of megawatts is self-mined, that's the number that's included. It's not total power. Unless, for the likes of Marathon and CleanSpark, where they put their power on their updates, that's the power that they have. They're not doing HPC at the moment, but if you can look at, some of the other ones there, they have been reduced. So the likes of Bitdeer, they've got significantly more power than that, but they only apply, I think it's just over 200 megawatts to self-mining, and the rest of it goes to hosting, management services, cloud hash rate, etc., etc. And they've also started HPC. Now, the HPC element for most of the miners that have got it in use at the moment isn't significant. So we're not talking about big megawatts, even if some of it was included, because the power requirements for HPC are nowhere near what they are for Bitcoin mining. So Hive stands out there, but Marathon and IREN, both showing good amounts of Bitcoin per megawatt, and likelihood is this might not stay as high as it is, because if you think about it, the difficulty continues to rise. It means production, it gets tighter. So it doesn't matter how many megawatts you've got out there. If you're not getting as much Bitcoin back for the hash rate that you've got on there, it means that your constantly going to be reducing your output by megawatt over the period. But he does highlight in terms of are miners utilizing, because again, this really, if they were just utilizing the power for Bitcoin mining, it pretty much should be level for across the playing field here. So it gives an opportunity for some people to say this metric shows that maybe some of the miners are not utilizing the power. Now you can look at Riot, for instance. There we know Riot have a 700 megawatt facility at Rockdale, and they've got 400 megawatts at Corsicana, and a further, I think it's 160 megawatts in Kentucky. They're not obviously using all that power all at the same time. I mean, they were doing some hosting at Rockdale. Uncertainty, I think they're only using effectively about 400 megawatts of the 700 for self-mining. But it's not clear as to what, so we have to use their total power unless we have an absolute figure to go in there. So Riot are probably using less than 1260, but hopefully in their next update, or when we get Jason on the podcast, we can highlight that a bit more. They have just recently paid off Rhodium to remove from the facility, so maybe they might be able to increase their hash rate at Rockdale. But again, that's a question for Jason when he comes on. He may be able to give a bit more colour to that particular area.
Yeah, for sure. Now, speaking of Riot, Anthony, bringing us home here, 2025 Bitcoin mined by exahash now instead of megawatt. And as you look across the board, I think these are actually my top three holds in position, Anthony. Riot, IREN, CleanSpark, the big boys, tier one miners coming out swinging in 2025.
Yeah, it's a change of the guard, because in the last 4 years, this was really led by Bitfarms and Hive. And then you had the likes of IREN, you had the likes of DMG, and CleanSpark also sort of making that top six. So Riot coming into that spot there is interesting for this year, because they started to also include their operational hash rate. And as I say, if you start including operational hash rate, this table should be extremely close. And you can see again the top six there, all over 17, and it's a fraction over 3 months. It's a fraction between all three. So really close call. All it takes is for one sort of bad month of mining, and you can lose a place. But already I can see, the top six. There's a little bit of a gap forming there between Bitfarms and Soluna. And the challenge is now, because this is an average for the first 3 months, if those miners in the bottom sort of 5 or 6 position want to try and obviously increase their performance, it will take a lot to actually catch the top six. Now that gap's growing really, really quickly, and you can certainly say of the top six there, most of those are going to be producing solid updates month on month for the rest of the year.
Yeah, we look forward to seeing those. Everything moving in the right direction here in terms of data points, Anthony, aside from hash price and Bitcoin price, again, in that $84,500 range. So you guys asked for data. There you have it, an hour packed of data, analytics, valuations, comparatives, and metrics. We look forward to hearing your comments in the section below. Let us know what you thought about March performance and this valuation concept we've been talking about throughout the week here. If you're still watching the video at this point, hopefully you found some value, so make sure you hit the like button. Feel free to subscribe. We'll see you back here next week.